Hey everybody, what's up? It's the Wizard here, and today I'm going to be explaining to you how to properly care for a black deck of playing cards. Now, before I explain to you how to properly care for a black deck of playing cards, it is imperative that you understand what properties these black decks carry with them and what sets these decks apart from your deck of Bicycle Standard cards, or even a more high-end deck such as the 311 Monarchs. Now, the first thing that you have to note about a black deck of cards such as the Shadow Masters deck is that the stock on these black decks is much thicker and also less flexible than the stock on, say, your deck of 311 Monarchs, or even the stock on your deck of Bicycle Standards. Now, the reasoning behind this is very simple, and it's that there is much more ink on your black deck of playing cards, in that you have a full layer of black ink here on the front, and you also have a full layer on the back. And as a result, not only is the card thicker and less flexible, the deck also wears out easier, and in addition to that, scratches on the cards, along with chips where, for example, like right there, if the camera will pick it up, where you can see more white on the card than what you should, and other things like that show up much, much easier. Now, the question that arises is, how do you fix that issue in these decks? And the simple answer is, you don't. However, that does not mean that you can't slow this process down and cannot ensure that you're not wearing out the black decks quicker than what you have to. Now, the first tip I have to maximize the potential of a black deck of playing cards is don't use this deck as much consecutively. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, for example, if you practice your Magic or your cardistry for 60 minutes in a row with the same deck, don't do that with a black deck. So if you practice for 60 minutes in a row with a normal deck, such as a Bicycle Standard deck, cut that time down with your black deck and use it for maybe half an hour, or even better, only 15 minutes in a row before you set the deck down for a bit and switch to a different deck for practice. The next thing I mean by this is don't use the same deck of cards for 2 days in a row. I see too many people doing this way too often, is that they will use the same deck of cards 2 days in a row, and what eventually happens after that goes on for a long time is this. The cards bow an extreme amount, or they develop a click, and that's definitely not a good thing for your deck. And that's why if you practice heavily with one deck of cards in one day, set the deck aside for a day and give it time to actually recover and return to its natural shape, and the next day switch and just practice with a different deck. Now, my next bit of advice goes out to everyone who's wondering, how do you reduce chipping in this deck? Now, if you'll note, on black decks, in the corners especially, you can often notice a white line in the corner after the deck has been used. Now, these white lines and spots are caused by the black ink on the deck of cards being chipped away to reveal the paper beneath. Now, this is a process that you can't really stop. No matter how much you try, if you're using a black deck at all, this chipping is inevitable. But you can slow it down and you can reduce it. Now, a major part of this is actually cutting your fingernails. Because if you notice, my fingernails are actually quite short, and they're not in any position to easily scratch the surface of these cards and chip away at the black ink. Now, the next major thing is faro shuffle your cards properly. So, if the cards are traditionally cut, faro them in the appropriate manner for traditionally cut cards. Because if you faro shuffle and you are forcing the cards together, that is one of the quickest ways to damage the corners. And this also segues into my next point, which is don't try and learn a brand new move on a black deck. So if you're trying to learn how to do a brand new flourish that you've never tried before, don't try and learn it on a black deck. Get one of your practice decks, like a Bicycle Standard, and use that instead. And also make sure you know how to do your flourishes, and don't try and force the cards to move in a way that you want with the black deck, because that only makes the chipping happen in a matter of seconds. And the final thing is, if you want to avoid chipping a black deck, don't do that as much. Don't dribble the cards as much, don't spring them as much, don't do shuffles with a bridge ending as much, and especially avoid riffle shuffles or pharaoh shuffles if you don't know how to do them. Because all the moves I just named off are some of the quickest ways I know on how to chip black decks at not only the corners but also the sides as well. So that's it for this video, and if you'd like to learn any more about the subject of how to properly care for a deck of cards, be sure to check out my other videos on the subject. The links to those will be in the description down below. And also consider checking out my ebook on the subject, and the link to that will be in the description down below.